The kitchen smelled of rosemary and warm bread, a sanctuary where Sarah's hands moved with quiet precision. At 70, her fingers, lined with the soft creases of time, kneaded dough as if it were an extension of her heart. The small house in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, hummed with the rhythm of her routine, chopping, stirring, tasting. For decades, this had been her canvas, her way of painting love into the lives of her husband, James, and their daughter, Rachel. Tonight, she was preparing James's favorite, a roast chicken with garlic mashed potatoes, hoping the familiar scent would coax a smile from him. Lately, his silences had grown heavier, his eyes distant, as if he were already somewhere else. Sarah glanced at the clock. 6:47 p.m. James would be home soon from the university, where he was still a revered professor emeritus, his name etched on plaques for groundbreaking research in literature. She smoothed her apron, catching her reflection in the window. Silver hair framed a face that still held a quiet beauty, though her eyes carried the weight of years spent pleasing others. She wondered, not for the first time, if she'd done enough, if she'd been enough. The front door creaked open, and James's footsteps echoed in the hall. Sarah's heart lifted, but his voice, when it came, was sharp, slicing through the warmth of the kitchen. "Sarah, we need to talk." She turned, wiping her hands on a towel, and saw him standing in the doorway, his gray suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. At 70, James was still striking tall, with a scholar's poise and eyes that could command a lecture hall. But tonight, those eyes avoided hers. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but steady. She gestured to the table, where the chicken rested, golden and fragrant. "Dinner's almost ready. We can." "No," James interrupted, his tone clipped. "This can't wait." He set his briefcase down, the thud reverberating in the quiet room. "I want a divorce." The words landed like a physical blow, stealing Sarah's breath. Her hands froze on the towel, the fabric crumpling in her grip. "A divorce?" she whispered, her mind scrambling to make sense of it. "James, we've been married for 42 years. Why now?" He exhaled, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Emily's husband passed away," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Robert's gone, and she needs me. I've always loved her, Sarah. You know that. I want to spend the rest of my life with her." Emily. The name pierced Sarah's heart, a ghost from a past she'd tried to bury. Emily, James's first love, a celebrated author whose books lined the shelves of every bookstore in Willow Creek. Sarah had known of their history, whispers of a romance cut short by circumstance, by Emily's marriage to Robert, a kind man who adored her. But Sarah had believed that chapter was closed, that her life with James, built on shared meals and quiet evenings, was enough. Now, standing in her kitchen, she felt like a fool. "James," she said, her voice trembling, "we have a family. Rachel, our grandson, Ethan. How can you just walk away?" His jaw tightened. "Rachel understands. She's happy for me. For us. Emily and I. We're meant to be together." "I'm sorry, Sarah, but this is what I want." The room spun. Sarah gripped the counter, her knuckles whitening. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but a deeper fear clawed at her. Had she failed him? Was it because she'd never gone to college, because she'd spent her life as a housewife while James and Emily dazzled the world with their intellect? The doubts swirled, but she forced them down, clinging to the one truth she knew. She had given him everything. 2 weeks later, the world seemed to celebrate James and Emily's reunion. Their wedding, held at the Grand Willow Creek Country Club, was a spectacle of white roses and crystal chandeliers, the kind of event that drew local news crews and social media influencers. Photos of the couple, James, dapper in a tailored tuxedo, and Emily, radiant in a cream silk gown, flooded the internet, captioned with hashtags like #LoveKnowsNoAge and #SecondChances. The narrative was irresistible. Two soulmates, torn apart by fate, reunited in their twilight years. No one mentioned Sarah. No one questioned the woman erased from the story. Sarah stood outside the country club, her coat pulled tight against the autumn chill. Her heart pounded as she watched guests stream through the gilded doors, their laughter a stark contrast to the ache in her chest. She hadn't planned to come. She'd spent days in her quiet house, replaying James's words, wrestling with the urge to disappear. But something, a spark of defiance, a refusal to be forgotten, had driven her here. She adjusted her scarf, her fingers brushing the simple gold band she still wore, and stepped inside. The banquet hall was a sea of elegance, filled with James's colleagues, Emily's literary admirers, and Willow Creek's elite. A massive screen displayed the couple's wedding photos, each image a testament to their joy. Sarah's eyes landed on Rachel, her daughter, clutching a bouquet of lilies near the stage. Rachel, 38, was a vision in a sapphire dress, her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo. But when she spotted Sarah, her smile vanished, replaced by a flash of anger. "Mom!" Rachel hissed, shoving the bouquet into a guest's hands and pushing through the crowd. "What are you doing here? This is Dad's day, Dad and Emily's. If you're here to make a scene, I swear I'll—" "Rachel," Sarah said, her voice calm despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm not here to fight. I just need to speak." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Speak? You don't belong here. Dad deserves to be happy, and Emily. She's everything you're not. She's brilliant, accomplished. You're just—" She trailed off, but the word hung unspoken. Nothing. The sting of Rachel's words cut deeper than Sarah expected. She'd raised Rachel, bandaged her scraped knees, stayed up late sewing her prom dress. Yet here was her daughter, siding with the woman who'd stolen her father. Before Sarah could respond, James appeared, his steps unsteady as he approached, Emily's hand clasped tightly in his. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and strained, "please, don't ruin this. Let's part on good terms." Sarah met his gaze, searching for the man who'd once promised her a life together. She saw only a stranger, clinging to a new dream. Emily, beside him, offered a practiced smile, her voice soft but laced with condescension. "Cynthia, we don't want trouble. Why don't you sit down? Enjoy the evening." The room seemed to close in, the murmurs of the crowd growing louder. Sarah felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken judgment, the uneducated housewife daring to disrupt a fairy tale. But then she remembered the kitchen, the years of meals she'd cooked, the dreams she'd sacrificed so James could shine. She straightened, her voice steady as she spoke. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said, loud enough for the nearest guests to turn. "I'm here to give you a gift, the truth." The hall quieted, curiosity rippling through the crowd. Sarah took a step forward, her eyes locked on James. "First, James, you funneled millions in research grants to Emily and her family. Money meant for your work, for our home, went to her vacations, her wardrobe, her so-called literary retreats." Gasps erupted, and James's face paled. Emily's smile faltered, but Sarah pressed on. "Second, after Rachel was born, you stopped touching me, stopped even sleeping in our room. You said you needed space for your research, but it wasn't for your books, was it? It was for her." She pointed at Emily, her voice rising. "You kept yourself for Emily, while I raised our daughter alone." The murmurs grew into a buzz, guests whispering furiously. Rachel stepped forward, her face flushed. "Mom, stop it. You're embarrassing yourself." But Sarah wasn't done. "And third," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "you and Emily were never just friends. You betrayed Robert, her husband, for decades, sneaking around behind his back, meeting at conferences, writing letters you thought no one would find. You built this fairy tale on lies." The hall exploded into chaos. Guests clutched their champagne flutes, some outraged, others gleeful at the scandal. James's hand trembled as he pointed at Sarah. "You're delusional," he spat. "How dare you say this in front of everyone? How dare I?" Sarah shot back, her voice ablaze. "You threw me away, James. You humiliated me. But I'm not the one who should be ashamed." She turned to the crowd, her chin high. "You all call this love? Ask yourselves what kind of man betrays his wife, his family, for a fantasy." Rachel grabbed Sarah's arm, her nails digging in. "Get out," she hissed. "You're ruining everything. Ethan's at home, Mom. Go take care of your grandson and leave us alone. The mention of Ethan, her 6-year-old grandson, pierced Sarah's resolve. She pictured his bright eyes, his laughter, and for a moment, she wavered. But then she saw Emily's smug expression, James's clenched jaw, and the crowd's judgmental stares. She pulled her arm free, her voice low but firm. I'm not done, Rachel. Not yet. Sarah turned and walked out, the weight of the night pressing against her chest. The autumn air hit her face as she stepped onto the street, her heart a tangle of pain and defiance. She'd spoken her truth, but at what cost? Her daughter despised her, her husband had erased her, and the town she'd called home now saw her as a bitter outcast. Yet, as she stood under the starlit sky, a spark of resolve flickered within her. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel for more tales of courage and redemption. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against Sarah's chest like a weight. She stood in the kitchen, the scent of rosemary lingering from a meal no one had eaten. The clock ticked past midnight, its steady rhythm a cruel reminder of the hours since she'd left the country club, her words still echoing in her mind. You built this fairy tale on lies. She'd meant to feel powerful, to reclaim something stolen. But now, alone in the dim light, all she felt was hollow. The gold band on her finger glinted, a mocking relic of a life she'd thought was hers. She twisted it off, dropping it onto the counter with a soft clink, and sank into a chair, her hands trembling. Sarah's mind churned, replaying the night. Rachel's venomous words, "You're just nothing," cut deeper than James's betrayal. Her daughter, her flesh and blood, had stood there, radiant in her betrayal, choosing a stranger over the woman who'd raised her. Sarah closed her eyes, and memories flooded in, unbidden. She saw herself at 19, standing in her father's dusty study, her dreams of college crumbling as he handed every penny of their savings to James, a boy with nothing but ambition. "He needs this more," her father had said, his voice heavy with duty. Sarah hadn't argued. She'd smiled, told James to study hard, promised to wait for him. She'd believed in him, in them. Now those sacrifices felt like chains. Had she been a fool to give so much? To trade her future for a man who'd spent decades comparing her to Emily, the woman he'd always wanted? Sarah's fingers traced the edge of the table, where she'd carved a tiny heart years ago, a secret mark from a night when James had kissed her and called her his home. But home, she realized, had been a lie. He'd mocked her lack of education, his voice dripping with disdain. "Read a book, Sarah. Don't embarrass me in front of my students." She tried once, borrowing a novel from the library, struggling through its pages late at night. When she'd asked James to explain a passage, he'd laughed, sharp and cold. "You wouldn't understand. Stick to the kitchen." The memory burned, and Sarah's chest tightened. She wanted to hate him, to hate Rachel, but a deeper fear gnawed at her. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was nothing. A housewife, uneducated, invisible. The thought was a knife, twisting until tears spilled down her cheeks. She pressed her palms to her face, muffling a sob, afraid the empty house would hear her weakness. "What am I without them?" she thought. "What am I at all?" Her phone buzzed, shattering the silence. A notification from Rachel's social media, a post pinned to the top of her profile. Sarah's heart sank as she opened it, the words blurring through her tears. "My mother has always been controlling, suffocating my father with her jealousy. He's finally free to love again, and I'm proud to stand by him and Emily, a woman of grace and intellect." The post had thousands of likes, comments flooding in. "Your mom sounds toxic. Poor James, trapped all those years. Emily's an inspiration." Sarah's breath hitched. Rachel hadn't just betrayed her. She'd weaponized the world against her. Another buzz. A private message from Rachel, each word a calculated stab. "Mom, you humiliated us. Everyone sees you for what you are, a bitter old woman. Dad told me the truth. He only married you because Grandpa paid for his college. He never loved you. Stop fighting and go back to the countryside. If you keep this up, I'll tell the whole town why he really stayed." Sarah's hands shook as she read the message again, the screen blurring. The idea that her marriage, her life, was a transaction, an obligation, felt like a death. She dropped the phone, her sobs breaking free, raw and unstoppable. Rachel's cruelty was surgical, cutting at the roots of Sarah's identity. Her daughter, the child she'd rocked to sleep, was now her executioner. Sarah stumbled to the living room, desperate for something to anchor her. Her eyes landed on a wooden box in the corner, a relic from her parents' home, untouched for years. She knelt, her fingers fumbling with the latch, and opened it to find a stack of letters, photos, and a worn leather journal, her father's. She hesitated, then opened the journal, its pages yellowed but familiar. His handwriting, steady and deliberate, filled the lines. She flipped to an entry dated the night before her wedding, her breath catching as she read. Sarah's nervous about marrying James, worried she's not enough for a man with his future. But I see the way he looks at her, like she's the sun after a long winter. He's a good man and she's my pride, stronger than she knows. If he ever hurts her, I'll be there. But I believe in them. Sarah's tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink. Her father's words were a lifeline, pulling her from the abyss. He'd believed in her, seen her worth when she couldn't. She read on, finding another entry from years later, after James's first big lecture. Sarah's the reason he shines. She keeps their home, their family, while he chases dreams. I wish she knew how much she's given the world. The journal slipped from her hands, and Sarah pressed it to her chest, her sobs softening into something else. Resolve. Her father's voice, long gone, reminded her who she was. Not a debt, not a failure, but a woman who'd built a life with her own hands. She stood, wiping her face, and returned to the kitchen. The gold band still lay on the counter, but it no longer felt like a shackle. She picked it up, slipping it into her pocket, a reminder of what she'd survived. Rachel's message glowed on her phone, but Sarah didn't reply. She wouldn't beg, wouldn't break. She thought of the country club, the crowd's whispers, Rachel's smug certainty that she'd won. But Sarah wasn't done. She'd spoken her truth once, and she'd do it again, louder, stronger. The next morning, Sarah woke to a new notification, this one from a local news site. Rachel had given an interview, her face poised and tearful, spinning a tale of a domineering mother who'd driven James into Emily's arms. My mom never understood Dad's brilliance, Rachel said, her voice dripping with pity. She made our home a prison. Emily freed him. The article was a sensation, shared across Willow Creek's social media, each comment a fresh wound. What a monster. No wonder he left her. Rachel's so brave for speaking out. Sarah's hands clenched, her nails digging into her palms. Rachel's lies weren't just cruel. They were a campaign, designed to bury her. She imagined Rachel in her sleek office, crafting posts, curating her image as the loyal daughter of a tragic hero. The thought ignited something in Sarah, a fire she hadn't felt in years. She opened her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to fight back, to tell the world who Rachel really was, but doubt crept in. What could she say that wouldn't sound desperate, bitter? She closed the laptop, her heart racing. Instead, she returned to the wooden box, pulling out a photo of her and her father, taken the summer before he died. They were in the garden, Sarah holding a basket of tomatoes, her father's arm around her. His smile was proud, unwavering. She traced his face, her voice a whisper. You'd stand up for me, wouldn't you? The journal's words echoed in her mind, stronger than she knows. She wasn't the woman Rachel described, nor the one James had discarded. She was Sarah, who'd fought for her family, who'd turned flour and love into meals that fed their dreams. And she wasn't finished. Sarah walked to the kitchen, her steps steady. She opened a drawer, pulling out a notebook where she'd once jotted recipes, and began to write. Not a recipe, but a plan. She'd find a lawyer, gather evidence, fight for what was hers. Rachel's threats, James's lies, the town's judgment. They wouldn't break her. She thought of Ethan, his small hand in hers, and vowed to show him what strength looked like. The journal lay open beside her, her father's words a beacon. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for him, for the girl who'd given up her dreams, for the woman she was becoming. Outside, the dawn broke, casting a soft glow through the window. Sarah stood, the notebook in her hand, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Rachel's war had just begun, and the world was watching. But Sarah wasn't afraid. She'd face the lies, the whispers, the pain. She'd face it all, because she was more than they'd ever know. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window, but it did nothing to warm the chill in Sarah's heart. She sat at the table, her coffee untouched, staring at the laptop screen. A headline screamed across the local news site, "Emily Harper's tearful confession. A love story interrupted by envy." Sarah's stomach churned as she clicked the video, her fingers hesitant. The talk show set was sleek, the host's smile polished, and there was Emily, radiant in a soft lavender dress, her eyes glistening with practiced tears. "James and I were torn apart years ago," Emily said, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. "But his ex-wife, she couldn't let him go. Her jealousy made their home a battlefield. I just want him to be happy." The audience applauded, their faces a mix of sympathy and awe. The host leaned in, her voice dripping with concern. "You're talking about Sarah, right? The woman who crashed your wedding?" Emily nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "She's hurt, I understand that. But her anger, it's consuming her. She's trying to destroy us." The screen cut to a photo of Sarah from the wedding, her face caught mid-speech, eyes blazing. The caption read, "The ex-wife's vendetta." Sarah slammed the laptop shut, her breath ragged. The world saw her as a villain, a bitter old woman clawing at a love story they envied. She paced the kitchen, her sanctuary now a cage, the walls closing in with every tick of the clock. Her phone buzzed with notifications, comments on Emily's post, each one a fresh wound. What a psycho. She should be ashamed. Emily's a saint for dealing with this. Sarah's hands shook as she silenced the phone, but the voices lingered, echoing her deepest fears. Was she wrong to fight? Was she the monster they claimed? The phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. It was her lawyer, Karen, her voice tense. "Sarah, we've hit a wall. James's colleagues, big names at the university, are leaning on the court to delay the divorce proceedings. They're saying it's to protect his reputation, but I think they're stalling to wear you down. If we don't act fast, you could walk away with nothing." Sarah's heart sank. James wasn't just erasing her from his life. He was erasing her rights, her future. She thanked Karen, her voice hollow, and hung up, staring at the notebook where she'd scribbled her plan. It felt futile now, a child's dream against a machine of power and privilege. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a young man, early 30s, with a camera bag slung over his shoulder. "Mrs. Sarah?" he said, his voice gentle but urgent. "I'm Michael, Robert's nephew. I heard about the wedding, what you said. I have something you need to see." Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him in. Michael set his bag on the table and pulled out a folder, his hands steady but his eyes haunted. "My uncle loved Emily, you know? Gave her everything, even after she got sick. But she was never his. Not really." He opened the folder, revealing a stack of photographs, grainy but unmistakable. James and Emily, laughing at a conference, their hands brushing. Another of them in a hotel lobby, her head on his shoulder. And then, a financial document, stamped with the university's seal, detailing transfers from James's research grants to an account under Emily's name. "I found these after Uncle Robert died," Michael said, his voice low. "He kept them, maybe because he couldn't face the truth. I couldn't either until now. You deserve to show the world who they are." Sarah's breath caught, her fingers tracing the edges of the photos. This was more than proof. It was a weapon, a way to tear down the lies that had buried her. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's jaw tightened. "Because you're fighting the same fight my uncle never could. He deserved better. So do you." That afternoon, Sarah met Laura, a young reporter who'd reached out after the wedding, drawn by Sarah's courage. Laura, barely 25, had once idolized Emily, but now her eyes sparkled with defiance. "I can get this out there," she said, holding Michael's folder. "My platform's small, but it's growing. People need to know the truth." They worked late into the night crafting a video. Michael narrated, his voice steady as he showed the photos, the documents, his words cutting through the fairy tale. "This isn't love," he said, holding up a photo of James and Emily. "This is betrayal. My uncle deserved loyalty. Sarah deserves justice." Laura uploaded the video to her social media, tagging local news outlets and university forums. By morning, it had exploded. Sarah watched, stunned, as the views climbed 10,000, then 50,000, then 500,000. Comments poured in, a tidal wave of outrage. "James is a fraud. Emily's been lying all along. Sarah's the real hero here." The university issued a statement, distancing itself from James, while publishers began whispering about pulling Emily's books. Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from strangers, neighbors, even old friends who'd stayed silent until now. "We're with you, Sarah. Keep fighting." But not everyone was swayed. Rachel, sensing the tide turning, doubled down. She posted a new article on her blog, a glossy defense of her father and Emily. "My mother's lies are tearing our family apart. Dad made mistakes, sure, but he's human. He used some funds to help a friend, Emily, during her illness. Is that a crime? They're victims of a witch hunt." The post backfired spectacularly. Commenters seized on her admission about the funds, demanding an investigation. "So James did misuse grants? Rachel just threw her dad under the bus." The university announced a formal inquiry, and Emily's latest book tour was canceled. Sarah's phone lit up with a message from Rachel, the words dripping with fury. "You've ruined everything, Mom. Dad's career, my future, all because you couldn't let go. You're pathetic." Sarah stared at the screen, her heart twisting. Rachel's anger was raw, but beneath it, Sarah sensed something new, desperation. Her daughter, so sure of her victory, was watching it crumble. Sarah didn't reply. She couldn't. Rachel had chosen her side, and Sarah was done pleading for love that wasn't hers. Laura burst into the kitchen, her laptop open. "Sarah, look at this." The video had hit 1 million views, trending across platforms. A hashtag Justice for Sarah, was gaining traction, with stories from other women who'd been discarded, silenced, erased. Sarah's eyes welled up, not with pain, but with something unfamiliar, pride. She wasn't alone anymore. The world, or at least part of it, saw her. That evening, Sarah stood before her bedroom mirror, smoothing her dress for a meeting with Karen. The version was set, and for the first time she felt ready. She thought of Michael, risking his own peace to give her this chance. Of Laura, whose belief had amplified her voice. Of her father, whose words still guided her. She touched the journal on her dresser, its pages a quiet strength. James and Emily could fight, Rachel could rage, but Sarah was no longer the woman they'd dismissed. She was a force, and she was coming for what was hers. The laptop glowed with the video, still playing, Michael's voice a steady drumbeat. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. The truth was out, and it was louder than their lies. She opened her eyes, her reflection steady, and whispered, "This is for you, Dad." Then she turned, ready for the battle ahead. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and truth. The courtroom was a sea of murmurs, the air thick with anticipation. Sarah stood at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly to steady their tremble. At 70, she felt the weight of every eye in the room. Judge, jurors, reporters, and, across the aisle, James, his face a mask of strained dignity. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed man in a tailored suit, shuffled papers, but Sarah could sense their unease. The video Michael had shared, now viewed millions of times, had shifted the tide. The hashtag Justice for Sarah trended across the country, and Willow Creek's elite, once James's allies, now whispered about his downfall. Sarah adjusted her simple navy dress, her father's journal tucked in her purse like a talisman. She was ready. Karen, her lawyer, leaned in, her voice low. They're crumbling, Sarah. James's team knows the evidence is ironclad. Stay strong. Sarah nodded, her eyes flicking to the gallery, where Laura, the young reporter, scribbled notes, her face alight with determination. The judge called for order, and James's lawyer rose, his tone smooth but desperate. Your Honor, my client seeks an amicable resolution. Professor Harper has supported his wife for decades. Surely, that entitles him to a fair division of assets. Sarah's jaw tightened. Supported me? She thought of the years scraping by on a meager allowance, every penny accounted for, while James funneled grants to Emily's lavish life. Karen stood, her voice cutting through the room. Supported? My client was denied financial autonomy, humiliated for her lack of education, and betrayed by a husband who misappropriated public funds for his mistress. We have proof, documents, photos, and a public ready to see justice done. The gallery buzzed, and the judge's eyes narrowed, fixed on James. James shifted, his hands clenching the table. For a moment, Sarah saw the man she'd married, young, earnest, promising her a future. But that man was gone, replaced by a stranger who traded her for a fantasy. The judge's gavel silenced the room, and he spoke, his voice firm. Given the evidence and public interest, I urge both parties to settle. Mr. Harper, your delay tactics have only deepened this scandal. What say you? James's lawyer whispered urgently, but James raised a hand, his voice low, defeated. I'll sign. The words hung heavy, a surrender Sarah had fought for. Karen slid the agreement across the table. $500,000 and a modest house in Willow Creek's outskirts, a fraction of James's wealth but enough for Sarah to start anew. James signed, his pen scratching like a final confession, and Sarah exhaled, a weight lifting from her chest. As the courtroom emptied, Rachel appeared, her sapphire dress a stark contrast to her pale, drawn face. She approached Sarah, her eyes darting nervously. Mom, she said, her voice soft, rehearsed. I'm sorry, I got carried away trying to protect Dad. Can we start over? The words were a performance, a last-ditch effort to salvage her image as the dutiful daughter. Sarah's heart ached, remembering Rachel as a child, giggling in the kitchen, flour on her cheeks. But that child was gone, replaced by a woman who'd wielded lies like weapons. Sarah met her daughter's gaze, her voice steady. Rachel, you chose your path. You stood by while they tore me apart, and you added your own knives. I don't need your apologies. I don't need you. Rachel's face crumpled, but Sarah turned away, her steps firm as she left the courthouse, the journal in her purse a quiet reminder of who she was. She'd loved Rachel, but love couldn't mend a bridge burned to ash. Spring arrived, and with it a new chapter. Sarah stood on a plot of land in Willow Creek's countryside, the air sweet with the scent of wildflowers. The $500,000 had bought this, a rolling field, a small farmhouse, and a vision. She'd named it Haven Farm, a nod to the sanctuary she'd once found in her kitchen. With help from local contractors, she built a restaurant, its wooden beams and open windows inviting weary travelers. She planted rows of tomatoes, zucchini, and herbs, her hands rediscovering the joy of creation. Chickens clucked in a nearby coop, their eggs destined for dishes she'd perfected over decades. The restaurant opened on a warm June day, its tables filled with locals and tourists drawn by word of mouth. Sarah moved through the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, her hands steady as she plated a rosemary chicken, its aroma a memory of love reborn. Guests raved about the food, the peace, the woman who'd turned pain into purpose. A young couple, their eyes bright, raised a glass to her. To Sarah, they said, for showing us what strength looks like. Sarah smiled, her heart full, and thought of her father, his journal's words echoing, stronger than she knows. One evening, as Sarah tallied the day's earnings, a woman approached, her face hesitant but warm. You're Sarah, aren't you? The one from the news. Sarah nodded, bracing for judgment, but the woman's eyes softened. I was at your trial following online. You inspired me to leave my husband. He was like, James, I run a bakery now because of you. Sarah's throat tightened, and she squeezed the woman's hand. Their shared silence a bond forged in courage. While Sarah thrived, James's world collapsed. The university terminated his contract, his portrait removed from the Hall of Scholars. Colleagues who'd once revered him now avoided his calls. His legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. Emily fared no better. Her books, once celebrated, were pulled from shelves, publishers citing ethical concerns. Her readings drew empty seats, her name synonymous with scandal. She retreated to a small apartment, her elegance faded, her eyes hollow with the cost of her choices. Rachel's fall was quieter but no less profound. Her dreams of climbing Willow Creek's social ladder crumbled as her blog lost followers. Her job offers dried up, and her so-called friends distanced themselves. One night, she sat in her darkened office, the glow of her laptop illuminating a draft email to Sarah, an apology she'd never send. She'd gambled on Emily's star, on her father's power, and lost everything. The silence around her was deafening, a mirror of the emptiness she'd created. She tried Sarah's number, but the call wouldn't connect, blocked, a final severance. Rachel buried her face in her hands, the weight of her choices a burden she'd carry alone. Months passed, and Haven Farm became a beacon. Women, young and old, visited, sharing stories of reinvention, of breaking free. Sarah listened, her kitchen a confessional, her food a communion. She hired a few, teaching them to plant, to cook, to believe in themselves. The farm was more than a business. It was a legacy, proof that a life could be rebuilt, no matter the years lost. On a crisp autumn evening, Sarah stood on the farmhouse porch, the sky ablaze with hues of gold and crimson. A letter lay in her hands, delivered that morning, its handwriting unfamiliar but heartfelt. Dear Sarah, I read about you online, saw your farm on the news. I was trapped in a marriage like yours, told I was nothing. You gave me the courage to leave, to start again. Thank you for being a light. Sarah's eyes welled up, the words a mirror of her journey. She folded the letter, tucking it into her pocket, and looked out at the fields, her fields, alive with the promise of tomorrow. She thought of her father, his journal a quiet presence in her heart. She'd paid a steep price, her marriage, her daughter, her old life, but she'd gained something greater, herself. The girl who'd given up her dreams, the woman who'd endured betrayal, stood now as Sarah, whole and free. The sunset bathed her in warmth, and she smiled, knowing this was enough. More than enough. Subscribe for more stories of courage and new beginnings.